I believe strongly there is one side here that is going to be right. There will be one side to Oregon battling Iowa that will age beautifully, and the other side will age like milk out in the sun on a paved road in Florida in the month of August. That's how I view this game. I made an early preview talking about Oregon, Iowa, what I think the key matchups are, my initial thoughts and what intuition was telling me. But the more this channel will make you a college football expert and help you enjoy watching games and make more accurate predictions. So what are you waiting for? Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, comment your thoughts, and watch the video all the way through so that you can get the full package. And check the description and pinned comment for more ways to help yourself and this channel. Dive into this. Oregon ranked 6th, 7-1, 4-1 in the Big Ten. They're top 5 unanimously in all the metrics. Iowa's 6-2, 4-1 in the Big Ten. They should be ranked. They're 24th in the coaches poll. It's a travesty they're not ranked in the AP poll. They are top 20 unanimously in a lot of metrics, and some metrics and power ratings even have them inside of the top 15. This is a game that will be decided in the trenches, first and foremost. And if there is a tie, I'm going to come out and say that Iowa will win because they have the special teams advantage. They also have the home field advantage and probably the environment advantage. So if everything as it stands is equal, Iowa should come out on top. However, that's going to be challenging because the metrics, the talent, the depth, the completeness of the team says that Oregon should win. That's why they're favored by 6.5, even though they have to travel across multiple time zones. Iowa gets a bye. I know Oregon does too, but home team getting a bye is probably more advantageous than a road team getting a bye. Let's talk about the road team here. We have Oregon's schedule pulled up. They have had some struggles in protecting their quarterback, in passing the football. The Wisconsin game, the Indiana game were clinics on this. They had some moments of inconsistency against Northwestern and Penn State. I do not really frown upon them for the result of that Penn State game. I think Penn State was a top 10 team, not top 5, as many, including myself, thought they were preseason, but that they were top 10 preseason, and the Oregon game just broke them. And after that, they kind of quit. Things fell apart. Franklin got fired. I credit them with the top 10 win there. But the loss to Indiana and the win over Wisconsin did expose some things that are not inviting for high praise, for labeling this team as the nation's best team or an elite team, where they struggled to protect their quarterback. Dante Moore showcased that his pocket awareness has a ways to go. And Oregon does not have many receiving options outside of Kenyon Sadiq and Brycen Moore. So if you're a complete and competent defense, you can sort of cover them well, lock down their options, and force much of their drastically inferior wide receivers and tight ends, as they have stars there, but they're not exceptionally deep, especially at wide receiver, to try to carry the load. And that doesn't work too well. The Indiana game was a perfect example of that. Indiana decided to focus on preventing Brycen Moore and Kenyon Sadiq from getting the football in space, or if they do, made sure they tackled well, made sure they minimized their impact, and they made sure to send plenty of sim pressures Dante Moore's way, and whether they actually brought a blitz, or they backed out of it, or they came from the opposite side that the O-line was sliding to protect, or the same side, they typically got to the quarterback and made Dante Moore think a little bit too much and take some sacks that he shouldn't have. And the Wisconsin game, it was a hurricane. Pass protection wasn't good. Wisconsin was able to run the ball in the first half, but Oregon, I think, showed who they truly are in terms of a quality of team and roster and physicality standpoint in the second half when they just bullied Wisconsin into submission. I take more away from the Indiana game than I do the Wisconsin game. Looking at the Hawkeyes' schedule, the home team, the loss to Iowa State hasn't aged beautifully, but I do not discredit them there because it was early in the year. I believe that Iowa has improved rapidly and markedly, particularly on defense, ever since that game. And it was a rivalry game on the road. So I don't take much away from that other than Iowa's not a top 10 team, because a top 10 team definitely goes into Jack Trice Stadium and wins. The Indiana game, 15-20 final score. Indiana had multiple opportunities to make that game uglier than it was, and maybe Indiana on a different day wins that by double digits. On another day, though, Iowa could have won that game outright, especially if Mark Gronowski stayed healthy for the entire game. And as for their wins, ever since that Rutgers and Indiana game, their secondary has tightened up. Wisconsin, they shut out. Minnesota, they held to 3. Penn State, 7 of that was from a special teams gaffe by Ferentz and the kicking unit. And the other points were mainly due to Penn State fielding a competent rushing offense, which we saw against Ohio State. When their coordinator was smart, they were able to kind of run the ball in Ohio State a little bit on the outside, because Penn State does have a good offensive line and good running backs. This is a team that loves taking away the football, making impact plays on special teams. They always tackle. Rarely do they miss them. They love to bring blitzes and send pressure. So I expect a lot of sim pressures from Phil Parker, and that chess match between him and Will Stein, and how Will Stein responds to what Parker sends his and Dante Moore, Decorian Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, and that offensive line's way. This was really a tough game to make a pick on, but we all have to make picks on games. We can't just say that both teams will win, even though, in all honesty, that's what I do want to say here. I think that both of these teams are undervalued, underrated. Iowa has a real shot in this game, and if they beat Oregon, there's no reason why they can't win out, and a 10-2 Iowa gets in the playoffs with that close loss to Indiana and wins against Oregon, a likely ranked USC, Nebraska on the road, and at least they played a Power 4 opponent in the non-conference in Iowa State. As for Oregon, they have shown me at different points of the year that they can put their roster together and potentially win a national championship this year. So a lot's at stake in this game. If Iowa wins, their playoff hopes are alive. Oregon's are in jeopardy, and now they can't afford any more losses. And if Oregon wins, it probably says something about the caliber of team they have, because if they are a fraud in any way, shape, or form, they're not winning this game. Iowa, meanwhile, if the Hawkeyes here, if they truly beat, those other 6 teams, and then you combine that with their loss to Indiana, and say they only lost to Indiana by 7, which they did, but Indiana played at their best, and they still only lost by 7. I'm not really counting that safety. Then they should win this game. If Iowa at home can play Indiana in a back-and-forth competitive game where Indiana's passing offense is way more competent and complete than Oregon's, and I think their defense is better, then they should beat Oregon. So this was a really tough game to pick. And I've said that several times, but that's what makes it true. I'm expressing that this was a difficult decision to make, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. For the Hawkeyes and Ducks, they are both top 10 in defensive points allowed per play. They're top 5 in ESPN's efficiency metrics on defense. You look at FEI ratings, Iowa has the 6th defense, Oregon has the 4th defense. The only teams ahead of them are Texas Tech, Ohio State, and Indiana, who per ESPN's efficiency metrics also have the top 3 defenses. This is a game in which both of these teams present very similar challenges to each other. Iowa has the superior special teams by a mile. Oregon has the superior passing attack by probably a mile. But both secondaries, I think, have an advantage over both wide receiver cores and probably both quarterbacks. Both D-lines have, I would say, advantages in pass rush, especially, I would say, Iowa's against Oregon's pass protection. They have advantages there, especially when factoring in the quarterbacks. And I would say that both offensive lines have advantages over the defensive lines in run blocking in the ground game. So there's a lot of similarities here. And how you pick a game where there are similarities, especially when the better team is on the road, so that you can't just go with, oh, I'm going to pick the better team here. The inferior team in terms of quality is at home. And they get a bye, and their stadium is especially known for creating chaos and noise, and that can affect an offense. And the key to this game is Oregon's offense. If Oregon offensively is not capable of protecting the quarterback and they're not capable of creating sustainable drives, then I don't care how good Oregon's defense is, Iowa's going to win. However, if they can protect the quarterback adequately and create X amount of sustainable drives, I don't know what X is. We're going to have to find that out on Saturday, solve for X. But whatever that number is, if they can hit that, no matter what Iowa does, I think offensively, then Oregon will win, because there is a limit to what Iowa can do offensively that Oregon does not have. I don't think there's really a limit to what any of these teams can do defensively. These are some of the best defenses in the country. For Oregon, pay attention to on offense, Dante Moore, and then the tackles, Isaiah World and Alex Harkey. How do they match up against some of Iowa's key players? Max Llewellyn, Aaron Graves, and Ethan Herkett on the defensive line. Look out for Deshaun Lee, TJ Hall, Cohen Entrinker, Xavier Nwapka, and Zach Lutmer. That is Iowa's secondary. How will they play against Decorian Moore, against Kenyon Sadiq, against Jeremiah McClellan, Gary Bryant Jr., Malik Benson? How do they face off? How does that battle for supremacy through the air look? And then for Oregon's defense, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, and Mateo Uyunglele are going to have their hands full with Trevor Locke, Jennings Dunker, Bo Stevens, Logan Jones, and then Mark Gronowski, who's often involved in that power run game. So this is going to be a physical war. That is one thing that I know. That's one thing that I knew days before this prediction segment. So some keys to the game that I talked about in the early preview. We'll just go over these pretty quickly. This could feature the best lines of scrimmage in college football. So I don't see a team gaining a significant edge in this category. Minor edges, though, I think could turn this game ugly pretty quickly. If one side, because of how the defenses work and because Iowa's special teams will kind of even out Oregon's offensive advantage, because the field position battle will favor Iowa here, I would expect. And Iowa will have an easier time getting field goals and saying, hey, we can't get in the end zone, but at least we can kick 3. I don't know if I trust Oregon to kick 3. A slight edge on the lines of scrimmage here can really blow things out of proportion, because I think so much here is evenly matched that to have any advantage at all that factors in the majority of where your plays are made, which is offense versus defense. Special teams factors in for sure, but special teams is not an every down thing. You know, if it's a 3 and out, it's 1 out of every 4 downs, for example. And even then that depends, because if it's a 4th and 1, even inside your own territory, Dan Lanning might go for it. With Tim Lester as OC, maybe even Kirk Ferentz would do that if he feels it's appropriate, though I don't think he'd be as inclined to be as aggressive as Dan Lanning. That's another thing. Conservative versus aggressive. That goes to the game plan. Who utilizes the bye better? Who plays to their strengths better? These defenses are top 5. Whoever wins the turnover battle has a wonderful chance to win. Just so much is being made about this game, and appropriately so. And yet, I think that one decision could turn this game from a 1-score victory for Team B into a 2-score victory for Team A. One decision, one play. And I think that segues perfectly into my prediction. So all good things must come to an end. Praising both of these teams, I'm going to have to pick one over the other. I believe that Iowa's pass defense and Oregon's pass offense will be a war. Oregon will probably get a chunk play here or there, given the nature of Phil Parker loving to send pressure, and Dante Moore and DeCorian Moore and Kenyon Sadiq having that, trifecta where you would love to have Evan Stewart back, because then you have 4 players who are connected and can make impact plays, and that makes it exponentially harder for the defense. But at least you have some playmakers to get open. But I also think Iowa's a really good chance of probably having an interception here or getting some type of pressure. And it's going to be difficult for either side there to get a lot of ground. That's pretty evenly matched. I think it's the same thing with both lines of scrimmage to a degree, and I'll get into this more when I reveal who I'm picking to win. The rush defense, rush offenses, I think that they will be pretty balanced. I do think that one side here probably has a 55 to 45 advantage, and that helped me make my prediction. As for Oregon, I think they have a slight staff advantage, but it's not all that big. It can easily be mitigated by some of the matchup edges that Iowa has. They have better special teams staff. They're playing host. Iowa is the inferior team here, but given the circumstance and some of the matchups, that didn't really factor into my prediction more than it already has, in the sense of Oregon being the favorite. Like, I don't think that Oregon is 3 touchdowns better than Iowa, for example. I don't think that. And then for the Oregon pass defense versus the Iowa pass offense, that's obviously something that goes Oregon's way. But Iowa has been willing and able to run Gronowski 10 plus times. And I think this might be a game where they do that. And if that happens, then they don't need to win in the passing department all that much if their defense and special teams does their job. I'm going to go with a pick that I think is pretty controversial for the college football media, for the public. This isn't even me being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. After looking it over and thinking about it, I genuinely feel this way. I think a little bit too much is being made up of this game. And what I mean by that is Iowa's a really good team who I think will play Oregon well here. And they'll show out and they will give a great effort, and it will be enough to win. The problem is there's an if clause with what Iowa can do here. And there is not an if clause with Oregon. If Oregon and Iowa both play to their ceiling, we know what happens. Oregon probably wins by double digits, or maybe even like a lot more than that. If both teams play to their floor, I would say Iowa probably wins, being the host and having that special teams edge. I'm not going to pick either team to play 100% or 0%, but I think off the bye, with Moore being healthy and Oregon's offensive staff being able to look at some things and reassess where they're at, and also the idea that there is one team in the Big Ten who I think, from an offensive line perspective, could have a more effective ground attack than what Indiana has. Iowa was able to control that pretty well. That's Oregon. I believe that Oregon's rushing attack at its peak is probably the best in the Big Ten. I know that USC's up there too, for sure. I think USC has somewhat to do with scheme in their backs, though. We've seen their rushing offense. It's still really good, but I think what Oregon offers currently is better than what USC offers currently. If Waymon Jordan were healthy, that might be a different story. I think that Oregon has the 55 to 45 edge in the trenches. And I think as the game goes on, that is going to be more evident, and it will just be hard for Iowa to catch up to that. So I'm picking Oregon to win by 7 to 10 points here. I think it'll be close, but at the end of the day, Oregon's the better team. I think Oregon has enough offensively to nullify the special teams advantage. And Indiana, I rewatched parts of that game today to get a better idea of Iowa. I think on a different day, there's a very good chance that Indiana is able to run the ball on those fourth down conversions and get it, and the game is already out of hand in the fourth quarter. So I think that Oregon, who in theory should be a little bit better in those situations, just due to the size on the O-line and the fact that I think they're better at tight end than Indiana, and maybe deeper on the offensive line, though it's close. It's just basically me saying I think that Oregon with the bye will be able to do enough, and with their talent to where you combine everything, and I'm picking Oregon to win and ultimately to cover as well. Looking at the Big Ten standings, Iowa only has one conference loss. So if they win here, they'll be ahead of Oregon in conference standings. I think if they win this game, they're probably going to win out. Because if they can beat this Oregon team, who I have a lot of respect for, they'll probably be able to beat USC, who I think they have some favorable matchups with. And they should beat Michigan State at home and Nebraska on the road. If Iowa wins, there's a very realistic chance that they're in the playoffs. In fact, I think it's likely if they're 10-2. Also, if they're 10-2, there is a chance they get to Indy. If they are, say, they're 10-2, Michigan's 10-2, and like by that they beat Ohio State, you have Ohio State, Michigan, and Iowa all with an 8-1 record. Iowa's played Oregon, USC, and Indiana. They've played a lot of teams that will have 7 or more Big Ten wins. Like 2 of them, which Ohio State and Michigan have not faced. And then they'll also have faced USC. They'll have faced Minnesota. They'll have faced, who else have they faced? Well, Nebraska, who has a few. There's a good chance that Iowa could actually have that tiebreaker advantage in that 3-way tie scenario and advance to play Indiana if they win out in Indianapolis, which would be insane. Oregon wins here. I think there's also a really good chance they win out, and we're talking about the same thing. They have an outside shot to Indy. The winner of this game, I think, goes to the college football playoff, and there's a good chance they could also go to Indianapolis, pending on the Michigan-Ohio State game. I hate it. In my gut, I feel like I feel like I said Ohio State. I feel like Iowa is going to win here, but my brain and looking at how Oregon has played versus how Iowa has played informs me that I believe it's very hard if you are a limited team to beat a team the caliber of Oregon. So I don't think Oregon's overvalued as some do. I also think Iowa's undervalued, which a lot don't. And I think it's a travesty Iowa isn't ranked. But I do not think that they will beat Oregon here. I think they're a little bit too limited offensively. They just don't quite have the horses that I would want them to. And it also has to do with Oregon's defense. If last year's Oregon run defense were here, I would sell everything and hit the invest button on Iowa. But I think this Oregon rush defense and defense overall is much improved and different from last year's. And that's a big difference when you're playing this type of Iowa team. Thank you for watching. It's my mission on College Football with Sam to make you the most informed, knowledgeable, and entertained fan as possible. We aren't perfect, but we hit the nail on the head more often than we hit our thumb with the hammer. Make sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, comment, and if you're here, you've probably already watched the whole video. So thank you for doing those things.